Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
The experience of putting your heart and soul into a job beyond kind of what is a kind of normal level of work-life balance, and then to be judged to be doing it very publicly, inadequately, and a report that tells the world that that's how you're judged and that's how it feels, very personal. That was 100% the worst. And the sort of months leading up to it were just absolutely atrocious. A feeling of drowning, being out of your depth, and not being able to solve the problems that were presenting to you every day, feeling responsible for thousands of people, like all the teachers, all the children, all their parents, and just thinking it's going wrong. That was tough. And then it all kind of exploding.
Today, I'm talking to Tom Sherrington, education consultant and author. With 30 years' experience as a teacher and school leader, Tom is now teaching teachers through his groundbreaking series of WalkThru books, which at the last count are being used in 50 countries around the world. Everywhere from Brighton to Brazil, from Norwich to New Zealand. And also he coaches through his blog teacherhead.com, which has thousands of followers. Tom is in demand worldwide and works with hundreds of schools and colleges providing training and consultancy support to improve the quality of teaching. As such, he's a regular keynote speaker at many education conferences and festivals. In our conversation, Tom shares what the students did to him as a supply teacher, what an exhausted colleague did when the next class was arriving, and why, when he couldn't see the wood for the trees, Tom went to see the trees in the wood. Tom, thank you so much for coming on to Better Under Pressure. You have spent your whole career in education, and you and I met in education. Firstly, obviously, you're teaching, and then now you're teaching teachers and writing and getting your head under the covers on learning, which I really, really love. So I'm very excited to have you. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be part of your excellent podcast.
Good. So, Tom, do you think you're better under pressure?
Well, this is the thorny issue. I think there's a healthy pressure that you create to be productive. And I feel like I do work well under pressure when I'm the person that's generated that pressure, because I set myself goals and I think I want to achieve things. And sometimes you push yourself to sort of declare things a bit publicly and you say, I'm going to do this, and it makes you do it. So I feel like as long as the pressure is a kind of pressure to perform and achieve in a kind of healthy way, then I think I respond well to that, because I feel like it motivates me to do things and to be energetic and so on. So yeah, it depends on who's providing the pressure, because when it's someone else's pressure, I don't think I do so well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And actually, it's funny you should mention your own pressure that you create, because sometimes, because you do an awful lot, don't you, on Twitter and calling things out. I know you for somebody who calls things out. Now, for me, that creates a huge amount of internal pressure. If I feel I'm saying something that might create some sort of difference of opinion. But you don't seem to care about that, Tom. That's what I really love about you. You just say what you feel and you say what you think, and you're happy to provoke. So that area of pressure doesn't seem to bother you quite so much, or it doesn't seem to. That fair?
I think I curate that. So I feel like with social media, it is, you have to manage the boundaries a bit. And although I do sort of say things that I feel I need to say, I do also do a little bit of, muting and blocking around the outside.
Okay.
Well, because I think you have to. I think sometimes you just think, I don't really need that person, kind of coming back at me like that all the time. So you think, well, I don't really know them. I'm not. So I do organise that a little bit, so it feels there's a bit of safety around that. But I do feel like sometimes I do have a platform, and I recognise that. So I do say things which I feel other people don't have a chance to say. And I do think that's important. But also I like to promote ideas. So if I think something's good and important, I do like to say, well, this is good. People should be doing this. And I think that's important to do that, because again, because I've created this platform, people will listen to it
Yeah. And I thought there'd be two ways we could have this conversation, actually. Firstly, well, not necessarily in this order, but I'm really interested in you and how you manage pressure. We'll get into that. But also I'm really intrigued in your work with teachers and the education profession, how you see pressure turning up for them. And when you feel it's healthy and sort of stretching pressure, and when you feel it turns into something else, and also how you see teachers who, frankly, don't necessarily choose to teach. And I speak as one who was one for 13 years. You don't go in it to earn money. So you go into it because learning matters, children matter, education matters. How you see pressure turning up for teachers at any level, really, and whether you see it turning up differently depending on how senior they are. So I'd really like to dig into that as well. So let's start with you, Tom, first. Okay. Talk about when was the worst pressure that you've ever felt personally?
Yeah, well, I've been commenting on that just now, today and this week, because people will know that there's an inquiry that's going on with Ofsted and the death of Ruth Perry, who's a head teacher who took her life after an inspection which judged her school to be inadequate. And that also happened to me. And so I've been sort of sharing my experience of being through an inspection where my school was judged inadequate and how that affected me, partly to show solidarity and to sort of say this isn't just a one-off thing. This happens to hundreds of people, in fact, and that is definitely the worst. So the experience of working really hard, sort of putting your heart and soul into a job beyond kind of what is a kind of normal level of work-life balance and all those things, and then to be judged to be doing it very publicly, inadequately, and a report that tells the world that that's how you're judged, and that's how it feels, very personal. That was 100% the worst, and the sort of months leading up to it were just absolutely atrocious. Just a feeling of drowning, being out of your depth, and not being able to solve the problems that were presenting to you every day, and feeling responsible for thousands of people, like all the teachers, all the children, all their parents, and just thinking it's going wrong and I don't quite know what to do about it.
Yeah,
that was tough. So yeah, and then it all kind of exploding. So that was extreme. Like if I had a graph of the pressure I experienced in my life, generally that was just a way off the scale, like just a massive spike, and I guess it gradually accumulated, but then it just went beyond what I could manage. So that was bad.
Yeah. How did you notice? I think it's such a good point you're making, because pressure can trickle along for a while for people, and then it, as you just said, spikes incredibly, and then you feel this like out of controlness, which on the whole I think is a really important part of pressure, is once we feel like we've relinquished control and we have got no choices, although we always have, of course, but it doesn't feel like that at the time. How did you notice that the pressure was going beyond invigorating and definitely into completely depleting?
You become emotional. That's how I noticed. Sort of literally, after a governor's meeting or something, where they're feeling the pressure too. They're feeling responsible, and they can tell things are, some of the challenges are not being resolved because they're difficult.
Yeah,
and you're trying to say we're doing all these things, and feeling a total lack of support from them for the things I was trying to do, even though they didn't know any better. And then just feeling emotional about that, just feeling like crying essentially, and just thinking, what am I supposed to do? And that is a feeling like, so in a way your body has this way of telling you, tears, crying, an emotional state that you get into, and that's like, most people don't go to work and have to experience that intensity of emotion. It's very rare even. And you notice that in other people, I think that emotional state, when it's unusual, when it's not a sort of something that happens to you very often for those reasons. There are other things.
But just on that, Tom, who saw it, and how did you get through that? Just the emotional bit. What helped you the most?
Close colleagues. So a couple of people would sort of discover, like in a state. I always felt though that it was wrong to bring that home. And sometimes I'll regret that, because I feel like perhaps I could have been more honest about those things. But actually, I felt like it doesn't feel right to sort of be doing. So I would sort of like process that kind of on the way home, or share it with someone in the organisation. But again, I don't think that helped me either, because they were also in it. So I just have this horrible. Yeah. I'm offloading to someone who I'm actually responsible for, and they're looking to me for guidance. And then there's me sort of saying, "Oh my God, I'm out of control." They're sort of looking at me, "Oh my God, what if you're out of control?"
God help us all.
Yeah, like, so what's the answer? And you feel like I never found the person who I could say, like, totally neutral, just, "Oh my God, this is," and I didn't have that to hand, and I feel like, I could have come home and shared those things, but, I felt like I needed to be a little bit more brave-faced, and perhaps was healthy to do, but that was my response to that.
And then what happened?
Well, what happened was that, the school was a very tough place to work, and we didn't really resolve some issues around behaviour management, and the school was judged to be inadequate. And basically, the governors didn't back me up, and I was more or less sacked. It wasn't officially that way, but literally on the last day of the school term, I had an email, not even a personal contact, just saying I didn't have the governor's support, and that was it. So I was like, oh God. So I went to this Christmas holiday just thinking, that's it, it's all over, and not knowing what to do about it. And then coming back after the Christmas holiday, this whole report was about to be made public, and it was just, I couldn't cope with it. So literally, I kind of just had a moment where I just said, I can't go in, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a weird feeling, like nobody told me not to go in. I just couldn't face it.
Yeah.
And that's never happened to me before or since. I just thought, I can't walk in those doors. And I went to see, I contacted you have union reps. And I contacted them, and they just said, well, join the club. We have calls from people like you every day. Wow. And they said, you're doing pretty well, because at least you can speak.
Gosh.
And they were saying, like, there were so many people who have this sort of intense experience, and it is a common phenomenon that people just sort of buckle under, and you're just sort of forgotten about, So that was bad. And what I did then was I decided I had to do something every day. So I went walking. So I used to go for walks, like really extreme walks. I could go out of the house at like 9:00 and just walk for the rest of the day through all the woods.
Wow, Tom.
Of London. I walked all the way through Queenswood, down through across to Parliament Hill, Primrose Hill, Hampstead Heath, down into Regent's Park, along the river, and all the way home, and just like.
What did that do? That's incredible, actually. That extension. Yeah, go on.
Just need to be moving, like just sort of and moving around, and sort of, and just seeing like beautiful places, and just doing something else, being physical rather than mental, and it gives you a chance to just think, it's going to be okay. It's not that there's going to be life beyond this, and you sort of start putting things into perspective slowly. You think, deep breath, and that sense of there's sort of all these sort of emotions of failure and being sort of humiliated slightly. You just think, well, it doesn't matter. Like, it's going to be all right. But you just need to be actively doing something when you're sort of working at like boom, boom, boom all the time, and then stopping dead. I felt like that was just my instinct to just do something else, which was to do that. So I went on walks every day for a good couple of weeks, and then thought, right, okay, I probably should start to get another job now. And I tried to sort of put myself out there, and then that sort of started to happen, but that took a while. But that instinct to walk and be in nature was something.
I think it's so important, and sometimes when we're going so fast, it's incredibly difficult to, in a way. I mean, in a way, your body was extraordinary. It just said, "I'm not going in. I'm just not walking into that building." That didn't seem like that was a cognitive decision in a way. It felt like your body just was not going to get you in through that door. And I love the body for that. I love the fact that actually, when we really train ourselves to listen to our body, we can move all sorts of things. I mean, it's like moving energy, basically. What I'm getting as you're talking about that is you're moving the energy right the way through, along what is moving it through, tracking it, moving it, shifting it, so that you can free up different space.
Seeing other parts of life. I mean, I remember one of the walks I went into this I think I just needed to go to the loo, to be honest. But I went to this pub, um, just down off on the Caledonian Road, and I walked in, and I just thought it was like a scene from EastEnders or something. It was full of all these elderly people, just having a great time and drinking Guinness and stuff. And it was like 1 o'clock, and it was packed. And from the outside, you couldn't really hear anything. They opened the door. It's like, whoa, it's lively. This community of people. I just thought, how amazing is that? Like, life goes on. Look at all these people just being in this place. And I just sat there for an hour or so. But that kind of thing was just to sort of get a different feeling of perspective, and just thinking, and it's like coming down from this huge sort of cliff. And it took me, that to do that. But it's interesting. I didn't really sort of connive. I didn't really think I need to do this because it will have this effect. I just thought I need to do something today. So
yeah, I mean, it's wonderful when you listen to your instinct, isn't it? Sometimes, it tells you what you need, and it's often very primeval. It's just like, get walking, move around, see. Because I think what's interesting about pressure does reduce, it constrains you. It literally constricts you, and your world becomes narrower. And you can only see one thing very, very brightly. And going for walks, you're looking around, you're seeing expansion, you're seeing things that are bigger than you through the trees, and then you're seeing different worlds as well. I love that.
I mean, to be honest, as a natural places, like if you could stand in the middle of Queenswood or parts of Hampstead Heath and feel like you have no idea you're in the middle of a city. And I used to love that sort of just being like away from everything. A few days into it, I sort of just taking a few pictures of the trees and stuff, and kind of absent-mindedly sort of uploading to Facebook, like you would, like posting where I am. And then I realised that people contact me saying, "Tom, where are you? Because aren't you at work?" I was like, and I wasn't really thinking at the time, this will make people realise I'm not at work, but maybe subconsciously I did.
Yes.
Because then people started saying, what's happened? And I thought, oh God, yeah. I wouldn't be able to do this on a work day normally, would I? And I kind of realised that was a bit of a giveaway. So then I had to sort of explain to people what was happening. But yeah, that was waving a little flag saying something's happened.
Yeah.
In the woods.
Well, often when you're reading about the research done on pressure, there tend to be sort of three key things that implode to make it like that spike you've just described, which is extreme uncertainty, which you had in buckets, volume, so like no respite, just relentlessly every day, getting worse, and high stakes.
Yeah, stakes.
High stakes is massive in terms of being the head teacher of a school that is being hugely scrutinized.
It is, and I think that's the real problem with it. It's a sort of gun to the head of feeling.
Yeah.
You feel like all the decisions you're taking, you're saying, well, you can't just sort of discuss them on their own merits and say, well, maybe that will work. Maybe we need to try this, and we've got this difficult situation. Maybe that will be the solution in a sort of rational way, because you're thinking, but we've got to because. What if they come? What if they come? They'll think this. They'll think that. You're sort of doing things short term rather than long term, and dressing things up when you shouldn't be. It'll look bad. You're thinking, well, no, it doesn't matter if it looks bad. It is bad, but you can't. You start thinking about things in a way which is unhealthy. But of course, I think this is the real hard truth of it, is that I think you stop performing as well as you should be. So because you can't see the wood for the trees, and one of the things that I think sometimes when you're under pressure is you almost have to think like, the best thing I can do now is not try to solve the problem, is just realize it's not going to go well unless I just take a big step back and go like, okay, look, really broad view here. What is the best focus, priority, and maybe be bold enough to act a few things and just say, look, just focus on that, keep it calm, just try to do fewer things better.
Mm-hmm.
But in the heat of it, where everything feels like it needs to be fixed, you kind of get stuck in a rabbit hole of addressing one thing and then don't address other things as well. And I felt like that was the biggest problem of all, that your own performance is the thing that it's just it is actually deteriorating, and you kind of don't want to believe that, but it is. And you can only see that afterwards, that you're doing or deciding things which were just not the most important thing to think about. or didn't go fully intensively enough into certain areas when you needed to.
Yeah. And
Especially
it
when it's
feels so
been-
counterintuitive, doesn't it, in the moment of the pressure as well, to slow down and as you say, take a massive step back. It seems, your what I would call, your sort of your dog brain, your sort of emotional hub of your brain in that sort of moment is thinking, keep going, keep doing, keep trying, keep going forward, faster, do more. And actually, it's not what's most useful at that point.
No, exactly. And it's that the dog brain.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can start feeling a bit sort of circle the wagonsy about things, like defensive, and so I feel like everything's against you, and that's not healthy either. It's a really terrible mindset to get into, but it can happen if you feel like at every turn things don't seem to go your way. And I remember calling this meeting. I just thought, well, one of these, I'm going to solve that. There are 10 children in this school who we just really don't know what to do with them, because they've got such chronic emotional trauma in their lives, and they don't have special needs in the learning sense. So they're not the special needs provision that was available to us was more to do with cognitive impairments and things like that. And these children were just emotionally traumatized, but they couldn't really focus very well on normal lessons. And there was no provision for them, so that you put them in a lesson and they'd be out in 5 minutes, swearing, fighting, just walking out. You'd find them on the corridor. What's happened? Why is this kid on the corridor? And there'd be loads of those, like in a day. And you think, case by case. The lives these children had led with just horrific scenarios. And I just had this meeting with these. I just called these people in from the local authority. I said, look, I really just wanted some help with these. What do you think we should be doing? Like, what would be the best provision? And none of them could answer me. They had no ideas. And they just said to me, well, we're just here to remind you that you're responsible for these children and you're accountable for them. And I was thinking, no, so I've asked you for help and you've come to put on even more pressure, and that's how that was their response. Yeah. I just thought, oh my God, I'm holding my hands up here and you're not helping me. That was like, I just thought, God, what does it take? What does it take, to get help? And I thought, that to me, it's sort of, triggers me a bit. You think, gosh.
Yeah. Can hear it. I know. Yeah. I mean, that is stored, isn't it? Those sorts of things that happen to us get stored in every cell of our body. So that we only have to revisit it like we are in this conversation. You can feel it.
I know the emotions come up.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? That's the power of this stuff, right?
Yeah, it is.
And so, for teachers particularly, who are, I've been a teacher. I'm now not a teacher. But one of the things that I think is completely amazing about teachers and what they do is you are on. There's no sense of taking 10 minutes off because you're not quite ready yet. You are on, and you've got 30 often very challenging individuals, particularly if you're working between 11 and 18, sitting, looking at you with expectations, time after time. I mean, in the school that you and I worked in, it was 5 hours every day, boom. And the younger you are, the less break you get. You can have a dreadful lesson, and then you've got like literally 90 seconds, if you're lucky, to then get yourself ready for the next 30 individuals that are lined up outside your door. And that, for all of the work that I've done since, and I've been working longer outside of education now than in, it's pretty unique, I would say, from most businesses. I'm not talking about nurses and I'm not talking about other vocations. I'm talking about enterprise businesses, which is where I spend most of my time now. I mean, there's different pressures, obviously, but this relentless performance with an audience is pretty intense, I'd say.
I think it is. And I think this is where, there's some interesting research around, teacher retention and what motivates people to stay in teaching. And it's a sense of autonomy is one of them. And so people like to feel that sense of freedom, but at the same time, they also want to feel, that they can develop professionally and that there's a sort of level of support. And I feel like when accountability pressure undercuts the support and reduces autonomy, those things get chipped away at.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting tension that you need to feel like you can be yourself and express yourself as a teacher, but at the same time, you need to feel supported by a system that's around you. And I feel like, in some situations I go in, that's really good. I mean, I go to visit schools where they're really nailing that, and it's like, wow, you really feel supported here. And others where it's pretty much sink or swim. the teachers say, well, I wouldn't know who to call. I don't know what happens if things go wrong. And I feel like that performance thing with students is tough. One of my favourite scenarios I've come across recently was with a friend of mine who's a very experienced teacher, exceptional English teacher, very talented guy. And so he's like someone at the top of his game.
Yeah.
But even he gets tired. He's teaching a full timetable. I went to visit him, and he was standing in the corridor at the end of lunchtime, and he'd had kids in his room all lunch, just some slightly more challenged children he did some extra support with, and they just left, and he'd had like a 5-minute break, and he went, "Oh, it's a bit full on today." Sort of offloaded to me a bit, going, "Guy, it's a bit tough. It's tough, you know." But then he saw his class come down the corridor, his year 11s, and he went, "Anyway, look, got to go. All right, guys, coming in. Yeah, great. Yeah, coming, great to see you." It's like switched it right back on.
Yeah.
Total energy. Bum bum bum. We're going to talk about Of Mice and Men or Macbeth or whatever he's doing. Straight into the teaching. So for him, he was like so switched on. But it's like he's a human being, highly functioning one. But at the end of that, he's going to be absolutely so the highs and lows of that performance. Some teachers find that incredibly hard, and then to be judged for it. Some of them say, "Ooh, you know, that wasn't as good as it could have been." You think, "Oh, God, you get in here and do this. It's tough."
I know.
But to run a room with 30 children and all learning, all thinking.
All at different stages.
It's so hard.
I want to go back to that tension that Tom referred to. The tension between having enough freedom to authentically express yourself and, at the same time, to feel that you're performing in a system that'll support you if you need it. Autonomy can provide challenge, and the system can provide support. Because research tells us that people grow most when exposed to both. Whether you're a teacher or not, this feels very relevant and can play a huge part in our relationship with pressure. When feeling pressure, it's useful to ask these questions. Do I have enough autonomy to grow? Do I have sufficient support? And actually, I'd follow up with one more. What can I choose to do to impact either of them? Because this, of course, immediately ignites a level of autonomy. I love the example Tom shared of his teacher colleague who switched in a split second from downloading how tough it had been into facing his advancing class and welcoming them with high positive energy. That's such a brilliant example of how we can instantly up the feeling of autonomy, not dependent on anyone else at all. And instead, it reminds ourselves that we have the freedom to choose. And it proves to ourselves that we always have autonomy over how we can respond to any situation. It was that practice as a teacher of switching state that I will be eternally grateful for. I learnt to shift my state in 90 seconds in a turnaround as one class left and another was lining up outside. I learnt that however badly that lesson had gone, I could depend on myself to shift into a positive state for the next class through a short ritual involving usually jumping up and down on the spot, a motivating self-talk, and turning and walking with energy towards the door with a smile. And I'm grateful that I learned that, although it did take time and a lot of very tough lessons to work it out. The relentless performance energy that you have to call on as a teacher required a routine to get me into a performance state. And I make no apology for the term performance, by the way, because that's what it is. And great performance, whether it's in the classroom, in the boardroom, on the sports field or on a stage, requires a deliberate routine or ritual to help us access that state quickly. Past guests have mentioned it on many occasions. For example, Charlotte Cox, President EMEA at Pentland Brands, talked about how she says to herself, "Now it's showtime, Charlotte." And more recently, neuroleadership coach and ultra athlete Lara Millwood referenced how she connects to the power of a starting gun. Once again, it's whatever works for you, and it does need practicing. Back to Tom.
In the education profession, we've been through a pretty dark tunnel of accountability-driven school improvement, which has scarred quite a lot of people, and it's sort of changing. Actually, I think it is changing, but it still needs to go further, so that you feel like rather than being sort of criticised for things going wrong, it should be, gosh, well, that's a tough problem to solve, isn't it? Yeah, how do we support you to solve that difficult challenge you have?
Yeah.
And if that's how it felt, that we were more sort of supporting each other to solve our challenges rather than criticised for doing things wrong or badly, it would be it's a total change in philosophy, which where that's present, it's palpable, and you feel teachers really enjoy their work far, far more.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what having had the experience that you've had, that must make you incredibly useful, I would say, for teachers, Tom. And, when you see and witness, because you're all over the world now, witnessing different classrooms and the learning that's going on within those systems, what do you say to people who are feeling that sort of pressure? I mean, what is their agency in a system that is maybe not necessarily providing the support that in our dreams we wish they would? What's your advice to those teachers?
Teachers, I always feel like there are things you can do, that to make the space that you're in with your own. You can own it. You can set some boundaries around it, and you can just try to create a job which you feel is the one you want to do and teach well. I always say that if you feel you're teaching well through doing certain things and establishing certain routines, most people will accept that, will support you for that. So sort of seize the mettle, take initiative, and rather than feeling like you're sort of subjected to this sort of external pressure, just say, well, what would you want to do? Imagine none of those people were there. What would you do? Do those things,
Yeah.
Do things you think are effective and do them well. And probably people will be happy with that. And sometimes people think, gosh, okay, so what would I do then? Because they're so used to just receiving directives. They haven't stopped to think, well, what are my own choices?
Mm-hmm.
Once you say, well, hey, that's a good idea, try that. Yeah, try that. And then sort of empowering people to kind of think more. Also, I'm a big believer, more and more actually, in collective action. I actually feel like, from the privileged position I have of going into a school and watching, 4 teachers that hour, 4 teachers that hour, 4 teachers that hour, you see that in one school, they all have so much in common. And when you say, don't go off fighting your own little siloed challenge, so many of the things that you're dealing with are similar. So why don't you all look at doing these things together? Because then it'll be much more coherent for the students, and you'll have solidarity in the fact that you're working on the same things, and you'll be able to exchange ideas. And I often find that's really important, to sort of build collaborative cultures where people are aware that the other people in the other room next door, which you can't see, are having similar problems to you, and you're not just fighting a solo battle, but it comes from the team up rather than the top down. And I think that's important, that people have that sort of collective agency and that sense of solving problems together.
Yeah, I mean, I love that, because you're talking so much about, the energies that, I talk about quite a lot, is that in order to have choice, we have to own our sources of energy. And I think it's so much harder to make choices, as, through your story, it's very evident that when you're completely run down and you've got no fuel in your tank, it's incredibly hard to feel like you have agency. Because it's fatiguing. But I think if you can start to really take that step back and look after yourself and know what actually your conditions for success are, which are very different for each individual, then you can operate within the system, because you can then find out where your choices are. And I love this point about people energy, find the people that are doing the same stuff, who are interested in the same things, who've got similar inquiries, and group together, because it's lonely. For all the autonomy you get for a teacher, it's very much a lone performance, hey?
I agree. And in fact, going back to the school where we first met, I mean, one of the things I felt was remarkable there was how you almost had to pretend that you were great in the classroom with the students' behaviour. You weren't allowed to say, but my year 9s are totally murdering me.
No.
It's only people would come to your rescue if they heard you shouting and loud enough through the door. But it wasn't like, how do we do it well? How do we support each other? That's not how I felt. So I felt like we had to sort of fight our own battle, and you'd learn some skills with it. And so you became quite good at it because you had to. But it wasn't because the system you walked into said, right, let's help you run a good classroom, and this is how it's done. It was like, get in there and work it out for yourself.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, okay. So I had a couple of fairly traumatic years there, thinking, blimey, this is tough. The kids are so rude.
I know. I mean, I jokingly call my time at that school, my my unintentional MBA in self-leadership.
Yeah.
And actually, it's been the biggest gift. I often say nothing is as bad as being in a dysfunctional year 9 lesson. It really isn't. Trying to teach in my view, you know, in my subject, trying to teach drama to year 9 boys who've decided they're not going to opt for it the next year was hell on earth. It was brutal, and it was often on a Monday morning. But this idea that you've just described about switching on, I learned how to do that. And I'm ever grateful for that, because the potential that we all have as human beings to switch into performance, if we have a drill, you know, if we have a way of doing it and we know how we can do it, I think is incredibly invaluable. It's not at the cost of not being able to say, I'm having a really bad time, but to be able to do both, to have the space to be able to say, where am I needing to learn more? How can you help me get better here? How can we collectively get better? To have that space, as well as the personal skill of saying, right, I'm on, like that guy, boom, see your class, right, okay, off we go, I'm on.
One of the things I learned very late in the day, I watched some videos at home, and a famous behaviour management guru called Bill Rogers from Australia, and he used this idea of positive framing, and I thought, well,
what a great guy.
Someone had told me that 10 years ago. Because honestly, I could sense that the students are coming to my class anticipating being told off by me, bad footing from the beginning, and I was like, well, how do I break that cycle? And he showed you how. It basically, you just say, come on, guys, good to see you. Thanks, everybody. This is great. Well done, you lot. These people are ready to learn. Excellent. Everyone, this table's ready. Brilliant. Michael, Joanna, thank you. Awesome. Yeah. Abdi, brilliant. And you also praise. And you say, then there's a couple, you go, Jonathan, Abdi, thank you. Michaela, excellent. Thanks. And it's all like waiting, patient, saying thanks a lot, rather than saying, Michaela, Abdi, turn around, shut up, and get not say anything to the kids doing it right. And I used to be terrible at that. You think people listening to this might be thinking, isn't that just basic? You think, well, sounds it when you know it, but when you're not doing it and no one's told you, it's a learnable skill to positive frame and be super positive.
It really is. And and people think it's common sense, but ultimately it's not very common unless you're practicing it on a regular basis, because you learn to complain if that's what your model has been most of the time, and you can learn to be positive if you practice it. You're making me remember a dreadful moment where I think I'd been teaching there for about 2 years. I was young, and I came in to teach it was a GCSE class drama, and there was one girl, Tom, who I will never forget, who sat on the outside of the circle, and she literally monologued throughout the whole of my lesson. Who the hell does she think she is? She strides in here and she thinks she can just control the class. Who does she think? She just basically monologued about me all the way through the lesson while I was trying to teach these new people that I'd never met before, because I was a newly qualified teacher. You have to hold your nerve. My God, did I teach myself how to hold my nerve? I totally ignored her for the whole lesson, but boy, it was tough.
Oh, so my brutal ones was, I first worked at that school as a supply teacher, which was like no one cared about you at all. Teaching maths to this, again, year 9. And I've probably had, I'd like to think the last stages of acne was, fading. And this girl said to me, get your disgusting spots out of my face, man.
Oh my God.
I just thought, oh my God. It's just and in that situation, there wasn't supposed to be anything that happened there. There wasn't like, okay, well, that's a consequence for that. That was just like, suck it up and go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we could reminisce endlessly about these things.
We could. But I think
the pressure there is sort of trying to find your space in a system. And I feel like when I go to schools and work with people, I usually, or nearly always, I'm talking to the teachers themselves, but I also talk to the leaders. And what I find interesting is how sometimes leaders with good intentions are not communicating what they think they're communicating to the teachers. And so sometimes you're in a position to say, well, actually, you're saying you've got lots of time and we're really supportive and we're there for you, and you've got time that you can direct yourself. The teacher's here. Yeah. We've been told to do this. We've been told to do that. Yeah. You do have sometimes on to work around this whole thing of let's create an energy which is positive pressure of sort of autonomy driven with a sense of ambition. And we want to do well, creating a kind of direction, a sense of direction and purpose, which doesn't feel whether the accountability element of it is in the right proportion. It's quite subtle, and I feel like it takes a lot of work to get that right.
I agree, and I think that sits across all sorts of organisations. That point you're just making there around the leadership communication, and I love your point about trying to find your space in the system. It's like, I think that is all of our ambition, really, is recognize the system, decide whether you can work in that system. I mean, I'm often working with people who are striving in a system that actually doesn't hit their value system. Whereas if they went to a different system, they'd probably thrive. Or they decide, actually, I'm going to make a choice to thrive in this system because I don't have any control over the system. But again, all of those are choices that you can make if you step away for a bit and assess it. I think leaders play a massive role in establishing the system and establishing the sort of the roadmap of what we're trying to do together. And pressure can really dilute that communication rather than distill it. And I think there is a distinction between dilution and distillation. You can distill it because it's so regular and it's such a drumbeat that everybody gets it and understands it and you can link it. But if you don't do it, then it just becomes completely diluted and everyone's trying to find their way.
I think there's a concept I quite like is alignment. Like it's useful if people are pulling in the same direction. How do you create alignment? You know, some people's approach is to sort of demand it, this is the way, it feels like rigid, but you can also just sell it and just say, look, let's all do this, and let people come to it because they agree with it and they get it and they want to be part of it, and that's obviously much healthier. But that risk also, people will then drift away, so you do have to work at that a lot harder because you have to kind of nudge people along and encourage people and sort of persuade people that this is the right way to go. Ultimately, people are always individuals, even if they're in a big organization.
Sure. But
if the whole organization relies on top-down driven, our way or this way or no way kind of thing, it's not a fun way to live. It also does create pressure on those leaders to keep doing that. And I always think, imagine you weren't there. The thing's got to work on its own. So you want to create alignment through people with a sense of shared vision and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to think about.
We do quite a lot of work with head teachers coming into new schools. One of the things that we always talk quite clearly about with them is often when they're coming into a school and they're trying to obviously make a new stamp or change the direction, or if it's been not such a very successful school, they've been brought in to make it successful, so the head teacher comes in, and often what we're trying to judge is how do you make sure that you come in and set your tone and set your direction without absolutely slaying the legacy that's gone on before, because 65%, maybe 75%, even 85% of your staff may have been there been part of that legacy. So to come in and say that everything you're doing is not really working, it's just tempering. How do you build and bring people with you and also take it into a slightly different, it's a leadership skill, isn't it?
I think one of the most fascinating things about these things is that you ultimately are working with specific individual people. And I mean, most of the people I know who are school leaders, when you're talking to them, they're talking about, this is the person who's responsible for that, and this person is that person, and they're good at this, but they find that hard, and this person's got a great skill set around this, and wow, sometimes they rave about certain people and other people, and they themselves are aware of their own limitations, and we know we're humans, so humans have this huge variation in how effective you are, and that makes it interesting. But ultimately, it is the challenge. It's not like you can draw the map of the organization diagram or whatever and make it all look neat, but actually the way that people communicate is way more organic and up and down and complex. And now I've sort of, I suppose I'm 6 and a bit years now into being my own boss. I just working for myself. It's funny that because the only organisation I have is one I've made, and we don't even employ people. We have sort of partnerships with people and publishing books and going to schools. It's very sort of, it's a different way of working. I do enjoy it, but I suppose it's worked well, and I've enjoyed it. I've got a colleague, a partner, and we have a sort of relationship between each other. So we kind of, the pressure that we put on each other is almost fueled by our enthusiasm for the work. So his enthusiasm fuels mine, and there's a kind of a sense of needing to pull our weight for each other. But it's much more. It's a total sort of partnership, and that's a wonderful thing. And as soon as that's not the case, I've had a few attempts at that with some other people where I thought, I'm doing all the work here.
Yes.
It doesn't work as well. So it's that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
But then you create pressure through ambition, through wanting things to be successful. And it's much less intense. I mean, I don't work nearly as hard as I used to do as a head teacher. You're busy and you're energetic and you're doing things, but the fact that it's all on your own terms is entirely different.
Yeah.
But of course, you're not responsible for 1,000 vulnerable people, and so of course it's not ever going to be as intense, I suppose. But one of the things I think it's worth saying in the context of people listening to this is that looking back over this sort of period, I wish I'd had the perspective that being like the ultimate successful head teacher, whatever, it wasn't the limit of my sense of what I might be able to do, because I'm so sort of locked into that feeling like it's the ultimate job, and to sort of not be doing well at that was difficult to take. But actually, if I'd known then that I could be successful doing something else, I might have been more just ready to just say, you know what, my analysis of the situation is I'm better off doing something else than this.
Yeah.
And just made a more sort of smooth transition to that without it being sort of so traumatic. It's easier. I don't know, maybe, can you only ever do those things in hindsight? I don't know. But I do feel like
but it's a great question.
Sometimes when you're in the hole, to think, I don't have to be in this hole. Just step away from it without shame or fear, and just, it'll be all right. And you just need to sort of trust that there's another world outside. And I feel like sometimes it's so hard to see that when you're in the thick of it, that there could be another way.
I so admire and value Tom's honesty in this conversation, and his humility about what he's learnt along the way through various moments of high pressure. His self-awareness in realising as a young teacher that when he came into the classroom, his students immediately anticipated that he was going to tell them off, and how he actively addressed that, to working as a head in a profoundly challenging school where there was no level of support in the system, and the immense impact that had on him. In both those situations, though, Tom, as he said, chose to break a cycle. In fact, a huge theme in this conversation is about choice and shared accountability and creating a sense of perspective to break that cycle. And the reminder that sometimes when we find ourselves in a hole, as he says, we can always step away. We always have a choice, even though it sometimes feels like we don't. When Tom was talking, I was reminded of that wonderful poem by Portia Nelson called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. So I thought I'd share it. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in this same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit, but my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street.
It didn't happen straight away. It took a good year or so to kind of piece together a kind of way of being, and being self-employed in a way which people knew where you were and what you could offer. But it's definitely, I'm happier now than I was then, for sure. So
I'm hearing that. I'm witnessing that. Yeah. And I mean, also, I mean, there are the sort of the movement of entrepreneurs is massive right now. Yeah. Because people are less and less tolerant around operating within systems that don't suit them, which, you know, from my point of view is demanding excellent leadership. It's requiring leaders who are inspiring and, you know, are energizing and compellingly ambitious, and people want to follow them, and they're not so easy to come across.
I think that's true. And I don't know, maybe it's a sort of generation thing, because when I started teaching when I was 21, and I left, I was 51. So it's like nearly 30 years. And you think, once I was in that groove, that was it. You know, that was, I'm one of those people, like, I just thought, well, that's what I'm going to do now. And I do notice younger people are much more sort of fluid, and they're thinking, well, I might do that, I might do this, and
yeah.
But even sometimes there are, like, within the education sector, there are types of schools, and I often feel like there's a school type regime which works in a certain way, and some people don't like it, and you think, well, don't work there then. You just
Yes, exactly.
work somewhere else. There are other schools. Find one where you're happy. Find one where the people are ones that you want to work with, because there's plenty of schools, and if you think this is it, then you're going to constantly be fighting against it. You're not going to be happy there. So don't try to be.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's just.
I think it's really important, Tom. I think we have to be able to back ourselves and believe that actually there's many things that we're here to do. And I think forcing a pause sometimes to ask yourself, have I done that for enough? I mean, you're talking to someone who stepped away from education years ago and plunged into setting up her own business. And I'm so pleased I did that. I'm also so pleased I taught for 13 years. But there may be something else now. Who knows? As people are ever evolving. And I love the fact that we have the potential to ever evolve if we make that choice.
Yeah.
What you're highlighting is that you can make that choice. And if you are smart enough to sort of slow down sometimes, I think, is what you're saying, to look around
and to look for other opportunities. And I guess to some extent, you've got to be prepared to fish around and explore what's possible. So even from over the last 6 years in my work, I've kind of become more specialised in certain things. I used to do a more broad set of things, but now this is what I like doing. This is what it's very exclusive to a certain set of things, and you find a new groove that you enjoy.
Yeah.
To have the confidence that post one career, you can do something else. Another good friend of mine who worked for a long time in the NHS as a scientist doing some genetics and things is now a wood furniture designer, carpenter, and makes beautiful things with wood, and totally different. I'm very happy doing it, and and of course there are some practical things about you need to be able to live.
Yeah.
Got to, but to perceive that there's a change is a good thing, and can be, especially in terms of mental health and all those sorts of things. Doing when you finally are doing the thing that you really enjoy, and you choose to do, then that's great, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you sound like you've gone naturally into the last two questions that I always ask a guest, Tom, which is, if you had to say two things that you would offer to anyone listening to the podcast, what would be your two pay forwards for someone who wants to be better under pressure?
Okay, well, I'm going to say one, which is to, when it's really intense pressure, that kind of negative pressure, is to evaluate whether it's something you want to stay in and solve, or whether you should just step away and look beyond. Because to me, that is something you should give yourself permission to do. That it's not a kind of cop out. It might be better for everybody, better for you to just change track completely, rather than allow yourself to feel like you failed. So just think, no, I'd be better doing something different, and that's the first thing. And the other one is to say, in the kind of the immediate response, I just think, I can't advocate it enough. Go walking in the woods.
I
because
love that.
It's a kind of, I don't know, it's a kind of, it gives you time to breathe, give yourself that time. And it might not be literally walking in the woods. You could use it as a metaphor for doing the thing which gives you space to think, and do that for as long as you need until you've got your head together.
I love that. And I love the fact that it may not necessarily be in the woods, but it's like a statement to remind yourself. I've got a statement where I say, up the mountain time. I want up the mountain time. And I may not, I'm in the centre of London. It's rare that I'm going to find a mountain to get up to, but it's a feeling I had when I was up a mountain that I can remember profoundly, and create up the mountain time, Sara, whatever that might be now. And I love that idea of go for a walk in the woods. Tom, thank you so much.
Thank you. Enjoyed that. It was great.
Yeah, great conversation. What did you say?
Very therapeutic.
Do you know what? That's what so many people say at the end of this is, I didn't think we could talk for an hour around pressure, but actually how how illuminating it's been. And I love that idea of being able to have space to deep dive on something. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks for listening, and you won't be surprised that over the next 2 weeks we will be honouring our shed and taking an off break. The next podcast will drop in January. Till then, goodbye.